Hi everyone, Adele here from Kingdom Initiatives and the All Shall Prosper movement. Today we're going to be continuing in our leadership discussions because as leaders in business, we've been called into this role not just to lead the businesses that we are involved in, whether you're in a leadership position in your business or whether you're in a leadership position in an organization, you've been called into that for a reason, for a purpose, and God has his hand on you for that purpose. So we're covering off on another subject today around leadership. Now, the most important thing for me last week when we went through the podcast and I shared with you was to cast vision and make sure that it is written on the tablet for all to see that people may run with that. That was from Habakkuk. Now, the next most important thing for me is that we establish the way that we do business. Now, every business has a different way of doing things, a different culture in their business. But the underpinning thing that we need to focus on is who are we as a business and how do we do what we do? So the question here is around values. What are the underpinning values that underpin everything we do and how we do it? It's really important to make sure that, number one, when you hire people, you make sure that you hire in line with those values. And number two, when you are in a place where your staff are operating in the running of the business and doing what the business does, that those values are very evident in the way that people do what they do in your business. Now, it's an interesting thing that I mentioned around bringing people into the business and making values part of your recruitment strategy. When you are recruiting, it is so important to make sure that people align with your values. So I'm sure that you as a company already have a set of values. I think you probably know the values, but I don't know if everyone else knows them. Maybe they're on a piece of paper, up on a wall somewhere. We're going to talk about living your values versus just seeing them. But the first thing to do is when you're recruiting somebody, you need to ask them what are their values. In the book Good to Great, they found that companies that recruited, and part of their recruitment process was values alignment, they had such a better success ratio as a business because the people they brought into the business naturally aligned with the values of the business naturally. You can hire for character and train for skill, but it's very, very difficult to hire for skill and change character. So this is really important to remember is hiring for character, training for skill is really important. And this aligns with this idea of values-based and values-aligned recruitment. Now, when you recruit based on values, you may have 5 values. And if you ask them what their top 5 values are, you're probably going to find that there's about 3 that will align. That's a good ratio. And it might not be the exact same word that you've used, but honesty and trustworthiness can be aligned. There's certain words, it might be the exact word, but if it has the same concept behind it, then you're on a winning path. So my goal is when I recruit is to recruit someone who has at least 3 out of my 5 or 60%, more than 50% of my values in their natural DNA. Then I know we're going to have a good values alignment. So first of all is recruitment. Now, the second part of this is in your staff that are currently in place, how do we make sure that the values are not just a piece of paper on a wall with the values listed on them, but are actually translated into behaviors? Well, the first thing that I would do is get everybody together and ask them, do you know what our values are? I'm going to guarantee you that there's a whole lot of people in your business that don't know what your values are. How can they even start to live them out if they don't know what they are to start off with? So one of the things that we do with companies is we try and make an acronym out of the first letters of the words in our values. So if you've got this cool acronym that everybody knows, then it's really easy for them to remember the words linked to the acronym. So that's really, really a good tool for you to use to start off with getting your staff to actually know what the values are. But now how do we translate that into behaviors? Because values need to be lived. Values are verbs. They're verbs, they're doing words, they translate or should translate into actions. So this is what I would suggest you do, is you get everybody around, you say, right, now that we know what they are, and we have a way of remembering them through this acronym, let's see what this looks like in practice. What do each of these values look like in practice in your role? What do they look like in practice in your specific job description and the job function that you have? And so I would task them all with writing down a list of what they do, and then looking at that list and saying, which value aligns best with this particular point in my job, this thing that I do, and how can I showcase the values best in each and every one of the things that's in my job description. Then what you do is you open the floor up and you say, can each person give us one example of how the values translate into your job role? And each person gives an example or two. Then what you can do is, with your leadership team, sit with them and say, all right, let's just look at the bigger picture here. Let's look at the departments within our business: finance, marketing, sales, operations. And I'd like you to look at each of those values and say, in each of those areas, what do each of these values look like in practice in those areas? Now, what I'd like you to do is ask the team then to make a list, each leader of each department, whether it is operations, sales, marketing, finance, whatever it is, they must write down how each of the values translates into actions and almost our policies in that operational team. Once you've agreed on that, then they need to go back to their team and outline that. The finance person needs to go and say, here's our top 5 values, and this is what it looks like in practice in our department. The marketing team does the same, the sales leader does the same, operations does the same. So then you will have a clear picture of how the values look in operation from an individual application perspective, as well as at a higher level when it comes to applying the values across the department. And that will naturally translate into the company applying the values in practice throughout the whole company. Now what you've got to do is you've got to monitor it. So you've got to look at what's being put out in the marketing, what's being put out in the sales messaging, the actions that are being taken in the finance team and the decisions there, and then the operations. How does it look? Are the actions aligning with our values now that we have shared what they should look like, but is it being done? And then it's a case of drip feeding this every single week into the team. So whenever you have your team meetings, usually on a Monday morning, right? Include the values discussion in that team meeting. And then ask them, guys, let's look at last week. Did we apply the values? What values did we see in action and which ones weren't so much in action, and how can we fix that? And so when you're recruiting and then when you are working with your team, it is really important to make sure that the values translate into actions. They become verbs. What should happen, the end goal of this, is that we should be able to take those values down off the wall. Anybody, whether they're in our team or even our clients and even our suppliers, should be able to be asked the question, what do you think this company's values are? And they should be able to say 5 things. And when they say those 5 things, those should be your values, because everybody is feeling and experiencing the values in action so much that it's easy to identify. Values are so important because we carry the reputation of our King, our faith, and we also carry the reputation of other businesses that say they're Christian businesses. Our values and how we do things is so important to making sure that we put out the right message about our faith, about other Christian businesses, by people looking at us But ultimately, we carry the reputation of our King, and we are here to uphold what is important to him. At the end of the day, he wants people to be able to see him through our businesses, and our values are the key to them seeing him in our businesses. So yeah, it's time to go and reevaluate those values, make sure that you're happy with them. Then sit down with your team, make sure that we drive actionable values and that values are seen in our everyday roles and what we're doing. And then when you're recruiting, make sure you hire people that have a natural values alignment. It's going to be so much easier to keep the values alive if they already are intrinsically part of that person's DNA. So all the best this week. Go and review the values, chat to the leadership team, and set the whole values chain in action so that it can translate your business into more of a kingdom business in action and in reputation.